Welcome back to the darkness, Verified Fears family. For those just joining our twisted community, you found your home for the most bone-chilling, sleep-stealing horror stories that actually happened. We're not here for Hollywood fiction. We dig deep into real encounters, true experiences, and verified nightmares that ordinary people have lived through and somehow survived to share. Tonight we're hitting the road with America's long-haul truckers, those fearless drivers who spend their nights navigating the most isolated, forgotten stretches of highway where anything can happen, and usually does. These aren't just scary stories. These are real testimonies from truckers who've encountered things that defy logic, challenge reality, and prove that our nation's highways hide secrets darker than the midnight sky. My name is Zion Matthews, and I've been running freight across the lower 48 for going on 12 years now. What happened to me last month on Interstate 40 through the New Mexico desert still keeps me awake at night, and I'm not sure I'll ever make sense of it. It started out as a routine run from Phoenix to Oklahoma City, hauling electronics for a big box store. I'd made this trip dozens of times before, knew every truck stop, every weigh station, every stretch of road like the back of my hand. My dispatcher Rebecca had given me the usual paperwork that Tuesday morning. Standard delivery window, nothing out of the ordinary. I was making good time, planning to grab some sleep at the Flying J in Gallup before pushing through to Albuquerque. Around 2:30 a.m., about 50 miles east of Flagstaff, my company radio crackled to life. Now, this wasn't unusual. Dispatch sometimes needed to update delivery times or route changes, especially on long hauls. But when I heard the voice, something felt off. It was Rebecca's voice, no doubt about it. But she sounded different somehow. Like she was talking through water or from very far away. Unit 47, this is dispatch. Need you to make an additional pickup in Roswell before your Oklahoma delivery. I keyed the mic, confused because Roswell was way south of my route, would add at least 6 hours to my trip. Dispatch, this is Zion. That pickup wasn't on my original manifest. Can you confirm the address and customer? Static filled the cab for a long moment before Rebecca's voice came back, even more distorted than before. Customer is Meridian Storage Solutions, 1847 Corona Drive. High priority freight driver. Company's depending on you. I'd never heard of Meridian Storage, and Corona Drive didn't ring any bells, but Rebecca sounded insistent. The thing was, when I tried to punch the address into my GPS, nothing came up. Not even the street name existed in Roswell according to my navigation system. I grabbed my road atlas from behind my seat, the old-school paper kind that saved my bacon more times than I can count when GPS fails. Flipped through the New Mexico pages, traced every street in Roswell with my finger. No Corona Drive anywhere. I keyed the radio again. Dispatch, I'm not finding this address. Can you double-check? The response came immediately. But now Rebecca's voice sounded almost mechanical. Address confirmed. Unit 47. Meridian Storage Solutions has been a client for 15 years. You've made deliveries there before. That stopped me cold because I knew for damn sure I'd never been to any Meridian Storage, and I keep meticulous records of every delivery I've ever made. My logbooks go back 8 years, and I can tell you every customer, every address, every load. But here's where it gets really strange. I decided to call dispatch directly on my cell phone to clear up the confusion. When I dialed the number, it went straight to voicemail. Rebecca's voicemail. But the message was wrong. Instead of our company's standard greeting, it was Rebecca's voice saying, "You've reached Meridian Storage Solutions. We're currently closed, but your delivery is expected. Please proceed to the loading dock." I hung up and tried again, thinking maybe I'd misdialed. Same message, word for word. My hands were starting to shake a little as I pulled into the next rest area to figure this out. I tried calling our night dispatcher, Mike, who should have been covering Rebecca's shift. His phone went straight to the same voicemail message about Meridian storage. That's when I noticed something else in my cab that made my blood run cold. Sitting on my passenger seat was a delivery manifest I'd never seen before. It was printed on our company letterhead, had my name and truck number at the top. But the pickup location was listed as Meridian Storage Solutions, 1847 Corona Drive, Roswell, NM. According to the manifest, I was supposed to pick up archived materials and deliver them to a warehouse in Oklahoma City that I'd never heard of either. The really creepy part was the date on the manifest. It was dated 3 days ago, and it showed I'd already made this pickup twice before, with delivery confirmations and everything. But I knew I'd never been to Roswell in my life. I fired up my laptop and tried searching for Meridian Storage Solutions online. What I found made me want to throw up. There were dozens of forum posts from other truckers dating back years, all describing similar experiences. Drivers getting mysterious dispatch calls to pick up freight from Meridian Storage, addresses that don't exist, phone calls that route to the wrong places. But here's the really terrifying part. Several of those truckers never made it to their next scheduled delivery. Their trucks were found abandoned on various highways, always with an empty trailer and no sign of the driver. The last post I read was from a guy named Marcus Chen, dated 6 months ago. He wrote, "Got another call from dispatch about Meridian Storage. This is the 4th time. Every time I ignore it, the calls get more insistent. I'm starting to see the address everywhere, on billboards, in my GPS history, even written in the condensation on my windows. I think I have to go this time. If anyone reads this and I don't post again, tell my wife I love her." Marcus never posted again. I searched for news articles about him and found a brief story in a Wyoming newspaper about a missing trucker whose rig was discovered on Interstate 80 with no cargo and no driver. I was shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone steady. The company radio crackled again, Rebecca's voice now sounding like it was coming from underwater. "Unit 47, you're behind schedule. Meridian Storage is waiting. Proceed to pick up immediately." I grabbed the mic and shouted back, "Rebecca, this is Zion. What the hell is going on? Where are you, really?" The static cleared for just a moment, and I heard Rebecca's real voice, panicked and distant, like she was calling from the bottom of a well. "Zion? Oh God, Zion, don't go to Roswell. I've been trying to warn drivers for months. Something's got hold of our dispatch system. It's not me sending those orders. Whatever you do, don't go to Corona Drive." Then the radio went completely dead. Not just silent, dead, like someone had cut the power. I tried my cell phone again, but now every number I dialed connected to that same Meridian Storage voicemail. I started my truck and got back on I-40, but instead of heading toward Roswell, I drove straight through to Oklahoma City. Made my original delivery without any problems, but the whole time, I kept expecting that radio to crackle back to life with another order to visit Meridian Storage. When I finally made it home to Phoenix 3 days later, I went straight to our dispatch office. Rebecca was there, looking pale and exhausted. She told me she'd been having nightmares for months about drivers who never came back, about deliveries to places that shouldn't exist. She showed me the real dispatch logs from that night. According to the computer, she'd never sent me any messages about Roswell or Meridian Storage. In fact, the system showed no record of any communication with my truck between Phoenix and Oklahoma City. But here's what really got me. When Rebecca pulled up the company's client database and searched for Meridian Storage Solutions, it was there. Full account history going back 15 years, dozens of pickups and deliveries, driver signatures on every manifest. And according to the records, I'd made 7 deliveries there over the past 2 years, including the night I'd refused to go. I quit long-haul trucking the next week. Now I only do local deliveries around Phoenix, never more than 100 miles from home. But sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I can still hear that distorted voice on the radio calling my unit number. And I know that somewhere out there in the desert, on a street that doesn't exist in a town that forgot it, Meridian Storage Solutions is still waiting for their next delivery. My name is Hayden Torres, and in 15 years of owner-operator trucking, I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. What happened at that godforsaken way station on Highway 287 in Wyoming last February proved me dead wrong, and I'm still not sure I'm entirely sane. It was one of those brutal February nights where the wind cuts through your jacket like a knife and the snow falls so hard you can barely see your own headlights. I was hauling a load of farm equipment from Denver up to Billings, running about 2 hours behind schedule because of the weather. My rig was empty on the back haul, just deadheading home to Laredo with nothing but my tools and personal gear in the trailer. I'd made this run probably 50 times over the years, knew every mile of Highway 287 through the Wyoming wilderness like it was my own driveway. Around 4:15 a.m., just north of Rawlins, I saw the portable way station signs lit up ahead. Now, normally I'd be annoyed about getting pulled into a scale house at that hour, especially in a blizzard. But I wasn't worried. My rig was legal, my logs were clean, and I had nothing to hide. The DOT officer who flagged me over was a big guy named Stetson Mitchell, according to his name tag, probably in his 50s with gray hair poking out from under his winter hat. He seemed friendly enough, just doing his job in miserable conditions. Evening, driver. Routine inspection tonight. Pop your trailer doors for me. I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching in the fresh snow, and walked back to unlock my trailer. Nothing back there but empty space, officer. Deadheading home from Denver. Stetson nodded and followed me to the back of the trailer. I swung open the doors, and the overhead lights from the way station illuminated the empty cargo space. At least, that's what I expected to see. Instead, Stetson's flashlight beam landed on 3 large bundles wrapped in heavy plastic, secured with rope and duct tape, sitting right in the middle of my trailer floor. What the hell? I stared at those bundles, my heart starting to pound. Officer, I swear to God, I have no idea what those are. My trailer's been empty since Denver. Stetson's expression had changed completely. His friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by the hard look of a cop who thinks he's caught someone red-handed. Mr. Torres, these bundles have been sitting in your trailer for at least a week, judging by the smell. You're telling me you didn't know you were hauling 3 bodies? Bodies. The word hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled backward, my legs feeling like rubber. Bodies? What are you talking about? There's nothing in my trailer. But even as I said it, the smell hit me. That sickly sweet stench of decay that makes your stomach turn inside out. Stetson was already on his radio, calling for backup and a crime scene team. I need units at the 287 way station north of Rawlins. Possible homicide transport. I kept shaking my head, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This is impossible. I checked my trailer in Denver. It was empty. I've got the bills of lading to prove it. Stetson looked at me with disgust. Save it for the detectives, driver. Step away from the vehicle and keep your hands visible. While we waited for the state troopers to arrive, I tried to think back over the past week. I'd made 3 runs, Phoenix to Salt Lake City, Salt Lake to Denver, and now Denver toward Billings. Every time I'd secured my trailer, every time I'd done my pre-trip inspections, it had been completely empty. I kept meticulous records, took photos of my empty trailer at the start and end of every trip for insurance purposes. But when Stetson made me show him my logbook, I nearly threw up. There were entries in my own handwriting that I didn't remember making. Detailed notes about pickup locations in Nevada, descriptions of cargo weights and securing methods, even mileage calculations for routes I'd never driven. The state troopers arrived about 20 minutes later, along with what looked like half the Wyoming State Police crime scene unit. They treated me like a suspect from minute 1, which I guess I was. Detective Sarah Kowalski read me my rights while the techs started processing my trailer. But here's where things got really weird. When they unwrapped those bundles, the bodies inside had been dead for weeks, maybe months. The coroner said later that based on decomposition, these people had died in late December. But according to my logbook, I'd picked them up just 5 days earlier. "Mr. Torres," Detective Kowalski said, showing me a clipboard with shipping manifests. "These documents show you've been transporting deceased individuals for a disposal company called Final Rest Services. You've got signatures, timestamps, everything. 4 separate pickups over the past month." I stared at those manifests in horror. They were on my company letterhead, had my DOT number and signature, but I'd never heard of Final Rest Services in my life. The addresses listed for the pickups were places I'd never been: a funeral home in Ely, Nevada, a mortuary in Grand Junction, Colorado, locations that didn't even exist when I tried to look them up later. But the worst part was the security footage. The crime scene techs had pulled video from truck stops along my route, and there I was, clear as day, loading wrapped bundles into my trailer at locations I had no memory of visiting. In the footage, I looked like I was sleepwalking. My movements were slow and mechanical, my face completely blank. At one point, the camera caught me looking directly at the lens, and my eyes were completely black, like someone had filled them with ink. They held me for 72 hours while they tried to figure out what the hell was going on. During that time, I called everyone I could think of. My insurance company, my lawyer, even contacted other drivers on CB forums to see if anyone had heard of anything like this happening before. That's when I found the first connection. A driver named Jude Martinez had posted on a trucking forum 6 months earlier about finding cargo in his trailer that he didn't remember loading. His post was almost identical to my situation. Empty trailer, mysterious manifests, security footage showing him loading cargo while appearing to be in a trance. Jude's post ended with him saying he was going to drive straight to the FBI field office in Denver to report what he thought was some kind of mind control experiment. That was the last anyone heard from him. His truck was found abandoned on Interstate 76, trailer empty, no sign of Jude anywhere. I started digging deeper and found similar stories going back years, always the same pattern. Drivers finding cargo they didn't remember loading, manifests for companies that didn't exist, security footage showing them in trance-like states. And in every case, the drivers either disappeared completely or ended up like me, sitting in a jail cell trying to explain the impossible. The breakthrough came when Detective Kowalski interviewed the other drivers who'd been at the weigh station that night. Turns out there had been 5 other trucks pulled in for inspection, but when she tried to contact them for statements, none of them existed. The license plates came back to vehicles that had been scrapped years ago. The DOT numbers belonged to companies that had gone out of business, and the driver's licenses were all expired or fake. Security footage from the weigh station showed my truck being the only vehicle there that night, even though I clearly remembered talking to other drivers, seeing their rigs parked nearby. That's when I realized what was really happening. The way station itself wasn't real. Stetson Mitchell wasn't a real Doughty officer. When Detective Kowalski tried to verify his employment, there was no record of him anywhere in the Wyoming Doughty system. The portable weigh station that had been set up on Highway 287 that night, according to the State Transportation Department, there were no scheduled inspections in that area for the entire month of February. I'd been pulled over by something that shouldn't have existed, inspected by someone who wasn't real, and somehow ended up with cargo that I'd loaded while under some kind of supernatural influence. They had to let me go eventually. You can't prosecute someone for crimes committed while they were apparently under paranormal influence, and the physical evidence was so impossible that no prosecutor would touch the case. But I was done with long-haul trucking, sold my rig the day I got out of jail, and now I work at a shipping warehouse in Laredo, never driving more than 20 miles from home. Sometimes I still wake up in cold sweats, wondering if I'm still driving that route. Still loading cargo I don't remember. Still getting pulled into weigh stations that exist in some nightmare dimension between reality and whatever hell I stumbled into that night on Highway 287. Because the truth is, I'm not entirely sure I ever really left. My name is Legend Washington, and after 23 years of hauling freight across every mile of asphalt in this country, I thought I knew all the roads like old friends. What happened to me on Highway 491 through southwestern Colorado last October changed everything I believed about the highways I'd driven 1,000 times before. I was running a time-sensitive load of medical equipment from Albuquerque to Grand Junction, taking my usual route up through Shiprock and Cortez. Highway 491 used to be called Highway 666 until they changed the number back in 2003 because of all the superstitious nonsense, but locals still called it the Devil's Highway. I'd always laughed at those stories. 23 years on the road, and the only devils I'd encountered were DOT officers and dispatch supervisors. The route through the high desert of Colorado is actually one of my favorites, especially in autumn when the aspens turn gold and the air gets crisp enough to bite. It was getting close to evening when I hit the Colorado border, maybe 7:30 p.m., and a thick fog was rolling in from the mountains like nothing I'd seen in all my years running this stretch. Within 20 minutes, visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet, forcing me to slow down to 35 miles per hour with my hazards flashing. That's when I started paying attention to the mile markers, using them to track my progress since my GPS was getting confused by the weather conditions. Mile marker 47, 46, 45. Everything normal, just counting down toward Cortez like they had for decades. But when I passed mile marker 44, something felt wrong. The fog seemed thicker, more oppressive, and my CB radio started picking up chatter from other truckers that made my skin crawl. First, it was a voice I didn't recognize, calling himself Matthias, broadcasting on Channel 19. Any drivers on 491, you need to turn back now. Don't let the mile markers go below 40. Something's wrong with this stretch tonight. I keyed my mic to respond, but before I could speak, another voice cut in, sounding panicked and desperate. This is Callum Hayes, driving a blue Peterbilt. I've been trying to get off this highway for 3 hours. The mile markers keep going lower, but Cortez never gets any closer. Turn around while you still can. I'd been driving this route for over 2 decades and knew every truck stop, every exit, every landmark. There was no way someone could be lost on Highway 491. It's basically a straight shot with clearly marked exits. But as I continued south, passing mile marker 43, then 42, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. The mile markers should have stopped at 41. That's where Highway 491 intersects with Highway 160 just north of Cortez. I'd driven this exact route probably 200 times, and I knew for certain that mile marker 41 was the last one before you hit civilization. When I passed mile marker 40, my blood went cold. Mile marker 39 appeared in my headlights like a ghost emerging from the fog, and that's when my CB radio exploded with desperate voices. "Don't go past 39, Matthias was screaming over the static. "I made it to mile marker 32 last month and barely got out alive. The road doesn't end where it's supposed to. It keeps going down, down into something that shouldn't exist." Another voice, this one belonging to someone calling himself Hayes, maybe the same Callum from earlier, was broadcasting coordinates and warnings. Mile marker 35 is where the temperature drops 20 degrees. Mile marker 30 is where your engine starts missing, even though nothing's wrong with it. Mile marker 25 is where you start seeing lights that aren't there. I should have turned around right then, but something was pulling me forward, like the fog itself was dragging my truck toward whatever lay ahead. My speedometers showed I was maintaining 30 miles per hour, but it felt like I was accelerating, being drawn inexorably toward mile markers that shouldn't exist. When I passed mile marker 38, my engine temperature gauge started fluctuating wildly, even though I'd just had a complete service 2 weeks earlier in Phoenix. Mile marker 37 brought a sound I'd never heard before. A low humming that seemed to come from the asphalt itself, vibrating through my tires and up through the chassis of my truck. My CB radio was now picking up what sounded like dozens of voices. All truckers, all warning about specific mile markers and what happened there. Mile marker 20 is where your headlights start showing things that aren't there, one voice said. Mile marker 15 is where you realize you're not alone in your cab anymore, said another. By the time I hit mile marker 35, I was genuinely terrified but somehow unable to stop. The temperature in my cab had dropped at least 15 degrees, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. My diesel engine, which had been running perfectly for 180,000 miles, started missing and stuttering like it was running on fumes, even though my fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. The fog outside had taken on an unnatural thickness, almost solid looking, and it was starting to glow with a sickly green phosphorescence. Mile marker 32 appeared, and that's when I saw the first abandoned truck. It was a red Kenworth, parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights still flashing, but the lights were dim and flickering like the battery was nearly dead. I grabbed my CB mic and tried to raise the driver, but got no response. As I passed the truck, I could see through the fog that there was no one in the cab, but the driver's door was standing wide open, like someone had gotten out in a hurry. The voices on the CB were getting more frantic as I approached mile marker 30. "Legend, is that your handle?" It was Matthias again, somehow knowing my name, even though I'd never transmitted it. "You're in a white Freightliner, aren't you? License plate starts with TX. You need to stop your truck right now and turn around. Don't let curiosity kill you like it did the rest of us." The fact that this stranger could see my truck in the fog and knew details about my rig made my hands shake on the steering wheel. Mile marker 28 brought the second abandoned truck. This one a blue Peterbilt that matched the description Callum Hayes had given earlier. It was parked at an impossible angle, like it had been set down by a giant hand rather than driven there. The driver's door was open on this one too, and I could see personal items scattered on the ground beside it. A logbook, a coffee mug, a cell phone with its screen still glowing. When mile marker 25 appeared in my headlights, I started seeing things that definitely weren't there. Shapes moving in the fog beside the highway, tall figures that walked with an unnatural gait, always staying just at the edge of my vision. My headlights would catch glimpses of them, elongated shadows that moved independently of any object that could cast them, faces pressed against the fog like it was glass, watching me pass with eyes that reflected my headlights, like an animal's. The CB radio was now broadcasting what sounded like a roll call of the damned. Voice after voice, all giving names and truck descriptions, all warning about specific mile markers. This is Rodriguez in a yellow Mac. Mile marker 18 is where the road starts going downhill, even though you're supposed to be on flat ground. Jackson here, driving a black Volvo. Mile marker 12 is where you realize you're not driving on asphalt anymore. Miller in a green International. Mile marker 8 is where you understand you're never going home. By mile marker 20, I'd lost count of the abandoned trucks. They lined both sides of the highway now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretching back into the fog like a graveyard of steel and chrome. Every door was open, every cab was empty, every truck looked like it had been abandoned mid-journey. Some had their engines still running, diesel exhaust mixing with the fog. Others sat silent and dark. Their chrome dulled and their paint faded like they'd been there for decades. Mile marker 15 brought the realization that I wasn't alone in my cab anymore. I could feel a presence in the passenger seat, something cold and patient that smelled like roadside decay and old motor oil. When I glanced over, there was nothing visible, but the seat cushion was compressed like someone heavy was sitting there, and I could hear the faint sound of breathing that wasn't mine. The voices on the CB had become a constant stream now, overlapping and echoing, creating a cacophony of warnings and pleas. But underneath all the chatter, I started hearing my own voice, broadcasting warnings to some future driver. This is Legend Washington in a white Freightliner. Don't go past mile marker 10. That's where you realize the highway doesn't end. It just keeps going down forever. When I saw mile marker 10 emerging from the fog ahead, I finally understood what was happening. This wasn't Highway 491 anymore. This was something else, something that wore the highway's face, but led somewhere no road should go. With every ounce of willpower I had left, I yanked my steering wheel hard to the left, jumping the median and heading back north. Back toward mile markers that counted up instead of down toward whatever zero held in store. I drove for 6 hours before I saw mile marker 41 again, and when I finally reached the intersection with Highway 160, I pulled into the first truck stop I could find and sat in my cab shaking until dawn. The other drivers there looked at me strangely when I tried to tell them what had happened. And when I called the Colorado DOT to report the abandoned trucks, they told me Highway 491 had been completely clear all night. But I know what I saw, and I know those voices on the CB were real. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through Colorado, I can still hear my own voice on Channel 19, warning drivers about mile markers that count down to zero and highways that lead straight to hell. My name is Jett, and I've been hauling sealed containers across the country for 8 years without ever questioning what was inside them. What I discovered during a routine run from Los Angeles to Atlanta on Interstate 10 last summer still makes me wake up screaming, wondering if I'm still the same person who climbed into that cab. I specialize in high-security freight, the kind of loads where you sign papers promising you'll never break the seals, never ask questions, and never deviate from your route. The pay is excellent, nearly double what regular freight haulers make, and up until July, I thought the premium was just for maintaining confidentiality about corporate shipments. My dispatcher, Cole, had given me the usual briefing that Tuesday morning at the terminal in Long Beach. 2 40-foot containers, sealed with tamper-proof locks, destination warehouse in Atlanta, standard 72-hour delivery window. The containers were heavier than the manifest indicated, which wasn't unusual for dense electronics or machinery. But about 6 hours into the drive, somewhere near the Arizona border, I started hearing sounds from inside the trailer. At first, I thought it was just cargo shifting, loose items moving around during turns or when I hit bumps. But as I continued east through the desert heat, the sounds became more rhythmic, more deliberate. It was tapping, like someone knocking on metal from the inside. 3 quick taps followed by 2 slow ones, over and over again. During my mandatory rest break at a truck stop outside Phoenix, I walked around my trailer doing my standard inspection, checking tires and connections. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were small holes drilled through the sides of both containers, maybe 1/4-inch diameter, positioned about 6 feet off the ground. They were barely visible unless you looked closely, and they definitely hadn't been there when I'd picked up the load. The holes were drilled from the inside out, with tiny metal shavings scattered on the ground beneath them. I tried calling Cole on my cell phone to report the damage, but his number went straight to voicemail. Company policy was clear about damaged cargo. Stop immediately, document everything, wait for instructions. But when I tried calling the main dispatch number, I got a recorded message saying the office was closed for maintenance, which made no sense since it was 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. Every other driver I tried to reach on the CB was either busy or not responding, and the truck stop manager just shrugged when I asked if he'd ever seen containers like mine before. The tapping continued as I got back on I-10, heading toward New Mexico, but now it was more frantic and organized. The pattern had changed. Now it was 5 quick taps, pause, 3 slow taps, pause, then what sounded like scratching or scraping against metal. I pulled over at the next rest area and walked around the trailer again, this time bringing a flashlight to examine those holes more carefully. What I saw made me nearly throw up. There were fingernail marks scratched into the metal around each hole, deep gouges that could only have been made by someone desperately trying to claw their way out. That's when I noticed Elliot, another driver I'd seen around various terminals over the years. He was parked about 50 yards away, doing his own trailer inspection. But when he saw me looking at my containers, he walked over with a grim expression on his face. "You hauling sealed freight for Cole?" he asked quietly. When I nodded, Elliot glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "3rd time this month I've seen containers like yours. Same holes, same scratching marks. You need to open them, Jett. Whatever's inside, it's not electronics." I explained about company policy, about the sealed manifest, about how opening the containers would cost me my job and probably result in criminal charges. Elliot just shook his head. "I thought the same thing 3 weeks ago. Drove a similar load all the way to Miami with the same sounds, same holes, same scratching. When they opened the containers at the destination, there were 12 people inside, all dead from dehydration and heat exposure. The shipping company disappeared overnight, and the FBI is still trying to figure out who was behind it." The weight of what Elliot was suggesting hit me like a physical blow. Human trafficking. I was hauling people, not cargo, and they were trapped in sealed metal containers in 100-degree heat without adequate ventilation. The tapping wasn't random cargo movement. It was people trying to signal for help, and those holes had been drilled by someone inside, desperately trying to create airflow. My hands were shaking as I walked back to examine the manifest more carefully, looking for clues I'd missed. The destination address in Atlanta was for a warehouse I'd delivered to before. But when I tried looking up the contact information online, nothing matched. The phone number on the shipping documents was disconnected, and the company name, Meridian Logistics Solutions, didn't show up in any business directories. Even stranger, when I checked my previous delivery records, I found shipping documents for 3 other loads to the same warehouse over the past 2 months. but I had no memory of making those deliveries. Elliot helped me examine the locks on the containers, and what we found confirmed my worst fears. These weren't standard shipping seals. They were designed to lock from the outside only, with no way for anyone inside to open them. The containers had minimal ventilation, maybe enough to keep cargo from getting too much moisture damage, but nowhere near adequate for human survival in extreme heat. The tapping from inside was getting weaker, more sporadic, and I realized that if there were people in there, they were running out of time. Making the decision to break those seals was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I knew it would end my career, possibly land me in prison, but I couldn't drive another mile knowing there might be people dying in my trailer. Elliot helped me cut through the locks with bolt cutters from his emergency kit, and when we opened the first container, the smell hit us like a wall. Human waste, sweat, fear, and death all mixed together in the stifling heat. Inside were 16 people, mostly young adults, cramped into a space barely big enough for 8. They were barely conscious from dehydration and heat exposure, but alive. The second container held 14 more people in similar condition. They were all undocumented immigrants who'd paid smugglers to transport them across the country, not knowing they'd be sealed in metal death traps for a 3-day journey across the desert southwest. We called 911 immediately, and within an hour, the rest area was swarming with ambulances, police cars, FBI agents, and Border Patrol officers. The people from the containers were rushed to hospitals in Phoenix, most of them in critical condition from heat stroke and dehydration. 3 of them didn't make it. They died hours earlier while I was driving through the Arizona desert, probably while I was stopping for fuel or food. Completely unaware that people were dying 20 feet behind me, the investigation that followed revealed a massive human trafficking operation that had been using legitimate trucking companies as unwitting accomplices. Dispatchers like Cole were part of the network, recruiting drivers who specialized in sealed freight and would follow orders without asking questions. The shipping manifests were all fake. The destination warehouses were fronts, and drivers like me were just the final link in a chain that stretched from Mexico to major cities across the United States. But here's the part that still haunts me. When FBI agents examined my truck's GPS records and electronic logs, they found evidence that I'd made these kinds of deliveries at least 6 times over the past year. The computer showed routes, fuel stops, and delivery confirmations for trips I had absolutely no memory of making. Security footage from truck stops along those routes showed me acting normally, going through my usual routines, but with a blank expression, like I was sleepwalking. The agents suspected I'd been drugged or somehow hypnotized during briefings at the terminal. Given subconscious instructions to complete the deliveries without questioning the cargo or remembering the details afterward, they found traces of unusual compounds in my coffee mug and logbook that could have induced temporary amnesia and compliance. The terrifying realization was that I'd been an unwilling participant in human trafficking for months without knowing it. Cole and the other dispatchers were arrested, the trucking company was shut down, and I was cleared of criminal charges since I'd been acting under the influence of mind-altering substances. But clearing my name legally didn't clear my conscience. I kept thinking about all those previous trips I couldn't remember, wondering how many people had died in containers I'd hauled while under the influence of whatever they'd been giving me. I quit trucking entirely after that. Sold my rig, moved back to my hometown in Kansas, and now I work at a grain elevator where the only thing I transport is corn and wheat. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, hearing that desperate tapping sound, wondering if somewhere out there another driver is hauling human cargo without knowing it, following orders they won't remember giving, transporting people who are running out of time in sealed metal boxes rolling across the endless American highways. The FBI says they've dismantled the network, but I know there are others. There always are. And somewhere out there, another driver just like me is getting a routine briefing for a high-security load, signing papers without reading them carefully, and climbing into a cab without knowing that the choices they make in the next 72 hours will haunt them for the rest of their lives. My name is Jesus, and I've been driving nights on Interstate 10 through the Arizona desert for 6 years, always keeping my CB tuned to Channel 19 for company during those long, lonely hours. What happened to me last November, on that cursed stretch between Phoenix and Tucson, still makes me question everything I thought I knew about reality, time, and whether I'm still the same person who started that run. I'm a religious man, always have been, and I chose to drive nights partly to avoid the heavy traffic, but mostly because there's something peaceful about the desert under stars, something that makes you feel closer to God. That Tuesday night started like any other. Picked up a load of furniture in Phoenix, bound for a warehouse in El Paso. Standard route down I-10 through Tucson and Las Cruces. My wife Maria always worried about me driving alone through the desert at night. But I'd done this run hundreds of times without incident, and the pay was good enough to support our family. Around 11:45 p.m., about 30 miles south of Phoenix, my CB radio crackled to life with a voice I didn't recognize, using a handle I'd never heard before. Breaker 19, this is Renata, eastbound on I-10. Got a Jesus driving a white Peterbilt. License starts with Texas. You need to get off the highway immediately. Take the next exit, any exit, just get off I-10 now. The message was so specific, so urgent, that it made my blood run cold. I keyed my mic to respond, but before I could speak, another voice cut in. Jesus, this is Oakley. I can see your rig from about 2 miles back. Whatever you do, don't take exit 164. Something's waiting for you there, something that's been waiting for a long time. Now I was genuinely scared, because exit 164 was exactly where I always stopped for fuel and a quick meal at the truck stop. I'd been using that same exit for 6 years. Knew the layout like my own driveway. But somehow these strangers on the CB knew my route better than I did. More voices started joining the conversation, all of them knowing impossible details about me and my truck. Jesus, this is Hayes. You're carrying furniture from Phoenix Wholesale? Invoice number starts with PW 47839. That invoice number was exactly right. But it was locked in my cab, and I'd never transmitted that information over the radio. Another voice, calling himself Callum, came through with even more specific details. Jesus, your fuel gauge is reading 3/4 full. Your odometer just rolled over 347,000 miles. And you've got a rosary hanging from your rearview mirror that your daughter made for you in Sunday school. Every detail was absolutely accurate, but there was no way these people could know such personal information. I started scanning my mirrors, looking for other trucks that might be following me or running parallel. But the desert highway was empty in both directions. The voices on the CB were getting more frantic, more desperate, all warning me about specific mile markers, specific exits, specific dangers that lay ahead on my route. Jesus, this is Matthias. Whatever you do, don't stop at mile marker 112. That's where it happens. That's where the accident occurs every time. My hand started shaking on the steering wheel. Mile marker 112 was still 15 miles ahead. But according to my GPS, it was right before the truck stop where I always made my fuel stop. What accident? I keyed my mic. What are you people talking about? The response came from multiple voices at once, creating an eerie chorus that made my skin crawl. The accident that kills you, Jesus. The accident that happened 6 years ago. The accident you've been trying to prevent by driving this same route over and over, but you can't remember because you die every time. I slammed on my brakes, pulling over to the shoulder with my hazard lights flashing, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might have a heart attack. That's when Renata's voice came through again, clearer than before, filled with a sadness that cut right through me. Jesus, you're a good man, a faithful man, but you've been dead since November 15th, 2018. You were driving this same route, same load, same everything, when a drunk driver crossed the median at mile marker 112 and hit you head on. Your wife Maria, your daughter Sophia, they're still waiting for you to come home, but you never made it past that truck stop. I grabbed my logbook, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. The date showed November 15th, 2024, but as I stared at the entries, they started changing before my eyes. The dates shifted, becoming November 15th, 2023, then 2022, then 2021, all the way back to 2018. The same route, the same cargo, the same everything, over and over again. I've been driving this exact trip for 6 years, but not as a living person, as something trapped in the moment before my death, trying desperately to change an outcome that had already been decided. The voices on the CB confirmed what I was starting to understand. We're all here with you, Jesus. All of us drivers who died on this stretch of highway. We've been trying to warn you, trying to help you remember. But every time you get close to mile marker 112, you forget everything and start the loop over again. Oakley's voice was gentle now, almost fatherly. The only way to break free is to remember what really happened, to accept that you're already gone. As I sat there on the shoulder of I-10, memories started flooding back. I remembered the impact, the terrible sound of crushing metal and breaking glass. I remembered seeing the headlights of the drunk driver's pickup truck crossing into my lane. Remembered trying to swerve but having nowhere to go. I remembered the moment of crushing pain, then darkness, then waking up in my truck cab with no memory of how I'd gotten there, starting the same delivery run all over again. Maria, I whispered into the CB mic. Is Maria okay? Is Sophia okay? Hayes answered, his voice heavy with compassion. They're alive, Jesus. But they've been grieving for 6 years. Maria still sets a place for you at dinner every night, still waits up hoping you'll walk through that door. Sophia's 16 now, and she still prays for her daddy to come home safe. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My little girl, who was 10 when I died, was now 16. I'd missed 6 years of her life, 6 years of watching her grow up, 6 years of birthdays and Christmas mornings and school plays. I'd been so focused on trying to prevent my death that I'd never stopped to consider what my continued absence was doing to the people I loved. How do I let go? I asked the voices on the radio. How do I stop this loop? Renata's voice came through one final time. You have to drive to mile marker 1 and 12, Jesus. You have to face what happened there, accept it, and let yourself move on. We'll be with you, all of us who've crossed over. We'll help you find your way home. I started my truck and pulled back onto I-10, driving slowly toward mile marker 112. With each mile that passed, I could feel my memories becoming clearer, sharper. I remembered the last conversation I'd had with Maria before leaving on that final trip. Remembered kissing Sophia goodnight and promising to bring her back a souvenir from El Paso. I remembered stopping at this same truck stop dozens of times over the years, always calling home to let them know I was safe. When mile marker 112 appeared in my headlights, I saw it all. The drunk driver's pickup truck barreling across the median, the moment of impact, the twisted wreckage of my cab. But this time, instead of trying to prevent it, I accepted it. I felt a peace wash over me that I hadn't experienced in 6 years, a sense of release that came with finally understanding what I needed to do. The voices on the CB were quieter now, more distant, but filled with warmth and welcome. That's it, Jesus. Let go. Your family will be okay. They'll always love you. But they need to heal, and you need to rest. As my truck and the memory of the accident began to fade around me, I saw a light ahead that was brighter and more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen on the desert highways. I don't know if Maria and Sophia will ever understand what happened to me during those 6 years, or if they'll simply remember me as the husband and father who died in a truck accident on I-10. But I hope they know that even in death, even trapped in that endless loop, my love for them never wavered, and that somewhere beyond the desert and the highways and the endless miles of asphalt, I'm finally home. My name is Remington, and after 11 years of hauling everything from frozen chicken to vintage motorcycles across the country's highways, I had always followed one rule: never, and I mean never, pick up a hitchhiker at night. The one time I broke that rule, on a rain-soaked stretch of U.S. Route 33 through the mountains of West Virginia, I learned some rules exist for a reason. That night was brutal. The rain hammered my windshield so hard the wipers were practically useless, and every passing minute made the world outside my cab a little more blurry and surreal. I'd picked up my load of machinery in Columbus and was cruising east toward Richmond, running a little behind schedule, but figuring I'd make up time after crossing the state line. US 33 through West Virginia can be a lonely stretch. Dark woods, steep inclines, and not much cell service until you're miles from civilization. My CB was quiet, nothing but static, so I switched it off and tried to focus on the road. At about 3 a.m., coming down one of those endless ridges near Spencer, my headlights swept over a figure standing in the breakdown lane. A woman, soaked to the bone, thumb extended, clutching a leather bag beneath her arm. I almost didn't stop. But something, a weird mix of guilt and curiosity, forced my foot onto the brake pedal. I rolled down the passenger window just enough to hear her voice through the storm. "Please," she said, shivering so badly I could barely make out her words. "I have to get to Richmond. My family. It's an emergency." Her name was Maxine. She said she'd been dropped off hours ago by another trucker who took the winding route to Charleston. She looked to be about 30, sharp-featured, short, reddish hair plastered to her head by the rain. I don't normally trust strangers, but something about her demeanor, urgent but not hysterical, put me at ease. "Hop in," I said, "but the cab's only slightly warmer than outside." Maxine climbed in, dripping water onto the floor mat, hugging the leather bag. She thanked me quickly, already scanning my dashboard and logbook. I noticed her eyes linger on the CB radio, and she seemed to breathe a little easier. "You're Remington, right?" she asked. "I saw your name on the side of the rig." I drove us east through the black woods, listening to the rain. At first, everything felt normal. She asked about my routes, my driving schedule, shared a little about her hometown, which she claimed was near Richmond. She was quiet, fidgeting with her bag, sometimes glancing nervously in the mirrors as if expecting someone to appear from behind. About an hour later, the CB crackled to life with static and a voice, so distorted by the storm I almost ignored it. Through the noise, I thought I heard my own name. "Remington, don't stop. She knows." I reached to turn it off, but Maxine gripped my arm, her knuckles bone white. "Please," she whispered, "just get me to Richmond. Don't listen to them." I nodded, figuring maybe she was paranoid or just half delirious from exposure. But as we approached the little town of Weston, my headlights swept past an abandoned sedan at the edge of the woods. Maxine tensed up, clutching her bag to her chest. "Keep going," she said. "Don't stop. That's not my ride." The CB sparked up again, voices overlapping, a deep male voice repeating, You have something that doesn't belong to you. The rig's engine started to stutter, the dashboard lights flickering. Maxine tried to hand me the leather bag and begged, "Whatever happens, promise me you'll take this to Richmond if I can't." I glanced inside the bag. Photos of families, old letters, birth certificates, faded documents written in languages I didn't recognize. "Why me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because you're the only one who stops," she said. "You're the only one who's driven this route every month for years." With that, the rig's headlights dimmed. I felt the mountain road tilt in a way I'd never experienced. Shapes flickered in the woods, figures, faces pressed against the windows, invisible and yet somehow real. The air in the cab went ice cold. My fingers stiffened on the wheel. Maxine started muttering prayers, her breath fogging the glass, her eyes wide with terror. Halfway between Weston and Elkins, the CB exploded with static. Voices, hundreds of them, shrieking for help, warning me to keep driving, to ignore whatever appeared on the shoulder. Every time another abandoned car appeared with its doors open, Maxine urged me on. "They're looking for me," she whispered. "I have to get home, but none of them want me to reach Richmond." I asked what she'd done, desperate for answers. Maxine turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks, and whispered, "I delivered something I never should have. I made a trade on this highway years ago. Ever since, I've been trying to get home before they catch up." She showed me a photo, a faded Polaroid, of her family standing in front of a truck identical to mine, back when she was a young girl. "He's out there," she said, "the one who made the deal. He waits for anyone who helps me. You must deliver the bag if I vanish." Suddenly, headlights appeared in the rear view, impossibly bright, growing closer as the CB started screaming. "Don't let her out. Drive. Whatever you do, drive." Maxine clung to the seat, the bag gripped tightly, as a black pickup pulled alongside. Inside was a man in a hat, his face obscured by shadow, who motioned for me to pull over. Against every instinct, I floored the throttle. The pickup kept pace, then turned off without warning, disappearing into a field. We made it out of the woods just as the dawn broke. As we drew closer to Richmond, Maxine grew weaker, barely able to speak. 3 miles from her claimed address, she handed me the bag with trembling hands, saying, "If you ever drive this route again, don't stop. Deliver this to the address on the top, and never, ever pick up a hitchhiker at night." I dropped her at the curb, turned to see if she'd stepped inside. She was gone, a wisp of fog blown apart by the wind. I delivered the bag nervously, leaving it with an old woman who only nodded and whispered, "You stopped when no one else would." I've driven US 33 a dozen times since. But I've never seen another hitchhiker, and I never pick anyone up. Sometimes late at night, the CB crackles with voices, warning, pleading, asking if anyone's headed toward Richmond with a passenger claiming a family emergency. I keep my eyes straight ahead, hands tight on the wheel, and remember Maxine. Some rules you break only once. My name is Briar, and in 14 years of keeping the most detailed logbooks in the trucking business, I thought I had every mile of Highway 50 through Nevada memorized down to the last pothole. What I discovered at that godforsaken fuel stop near the middle of nowhere last March proved that some roads hold secrets that no amount of careful record-keeping can prepare you for. I've always been methodical about my driving. Every fuel stop documented, every rest break time to the minute, every route variation noted in my personal logs that go way beyond what the DOT requires. My wife Sarah used to joke that I could navigate the entire western United States blindfolded just from my notes, and she wasn't far wrong. That's what made what happened on Highway 50 so terrifying. I found evidence of stops I'd made at a place I'd never been, with details I'd never recorded, in handwriting that was unmistakably mine. It was one of those crystal-clear March nights in the Nevada desert, the kind where you can see every star and the road stretches endlessly ahead like a ribbon of black velvet. I was hauling computer equipment from Reno to Denver, taking the scenic route through the loneliest road in America because I loved the solitude and the way the desert looked under moonlight. Around 4:30 a.m., about 60 miles east of Fallon, my fuel gauge hit the quarter tank mark, right on schedule for my planned stop at the Sinclair station in Austin. But when I crested the hill where Austin should have been, there was nothing but empty desert. No town, no lights, no fuel station, just sagebrush and darkness stretching to the horizon. I pulled over and checked my GPS, thinking maybe I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. But according to every navigation system I had, I was exactly where Austin should be. That's when I saw it in my headlights, a single building about a quarter mile off the highway, with a faded Sinclair sign flickering in the darkness. The fuel stop looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The pumps were old-style mechanical ones with analog displays, the kind they stopped making in the 1980s. Paint was peeling off the building in long strips, and half the letters in the neon sign were burned out. But the diesel pump was working, and I needed fuel to make it to the next station, so I pulled up and started filling my tanks. That's when I found the first piece of evidence that something was seriously wrong. Taped to the pump was a fuel receipt with my name on it, dated 3 weeks earlier, for the exact same amount of diesel I was pumping. The receipt was in my handwriting, signed with my signature. But I'd never been to this fuel stop in my life. According to my meticulously kept logbooks, 3 weeks ago I was running a load from Seattle to Phoenix, nowhere near Nevada. I walked into the building to pay for my fuel, and the scene inside made my blood run cold. Behind the counter sat an elderly woman named Danielle, according to her name tag, who looked up at me with a knowing smile. "Back again, Briar? Right on schedule, just like always." She handed me a credit card receipt to sign, but when I looked at the date, it showed today's date with a timestamp from 6 months in the future. "Ma'am, I think there's been some mistake," I started to say. But Danielle just chuckled and pointed to a wall covered with photographs. "No mistake, honey. You've been stopping here every 3 weeks for the past 2 years. Same truck, same route, same confused look on your face every single time." The photograph showed me at this exact fuel stop. Dozens of pictures spanning what looked like multiple seasons, all showing me pumping diesel, signing receipts, looking bewildered. In some of the photos, I was wearing clothes I recognized, but in others I was dressed in jackets and shirts I'd never owned. Some pictures showed me looking younger, others older, like they'd been taken across a span of years instead of months. But in every single photograph, I had the same expression of confusion and recognition, like I was simultaneously familiar with the place and completely lost. Danielle showed me a ledger book filled with my signatures, dating back 2 years, all for fuel purchases I had no memory of making. "You always ask the same questions," she said, her voice taking on an eerie mechanical quality. "You always check your logbook, always insist you've never been here before, always promise you'll remember next time. But you never do, Briar. You never remember." I ran back to my truck and grabbed my logbooks, desperately searching for any record of previous stops at this location. What I found made my hands shake so badly I could barely turn the pages. There were entries in my own handwriting describing fuel stops at this exact location. detailed notes about the strange woman behind the counter, even sketches of the building's layout. But I had absolutely no memory of writing any of it. The entries went back over a year, appearing every 3 weeks like clockwork, always on nights when I was supposedly running loads through Nevada. According to my own records, I'd been documenting my confusion about this place for months, writing increasingly desperate notes to my future self. You've been here before. The woman knows you. Check the photographs. Something is wrong with time here. One entry, dated 6 months earlier, was particularly chilling. This is the 7th time I've stopped here that I can remember writing about. Danielle says it's been going on for 2 years. I've started leaving myself notes, but I keep forgetting to read them until I'm already here. The fuel gauge always hits quarter tank at exactly the same spot, no matter what truck I'm driving or what route I'm taking. I stumbled back into the building, demanding answers from Danielle, but she just smiled that same knowing smile. Time works differently here, Briar. This place exists between the minutes, in the spaces where memory goes to die. You stop here because you need to. Because some part of you is trying to remember something important, but you can never quite grasp what it is. She handed me a manila envelope with my name on it, sealed but worn like it had been handled many times. You left this for yourself 6 months ago. Said to give it to you the next time you seemed ready to understand. Inside was a letter in my own handwriting. Briar, if you're reading this, it means you're still trapped in the loop. Sarah died in the accident. You've been driving the same routes, making the same stops, trying to get home to her, but she's not there anymore. This fuel stop is where you were heading when you got the call about the crash. You keep coming back here because it's the last place you were happy before you knew. The memories hit me like a physical blow. The phone call from the hospital, Sarah's voice weak and fading, telling me she loved me one last time before the line went dead. The 3-day drive across the country, pushing myself and my truck beyond all limits to get home, only to arrive at a funeral instead of a homecoming. The weeks of driving aimlessly afterward, unable to face an empty house, living in my cab and taking any load that would keep me moving. Danielle's expression had changed to one of infinite sadness. You've been trying to drive back to that moment before you knew Briar. But you can't change what happened. Sarah's been gone for 2 years, and you've been stuck here, reliving the same night over and over, trying to get home to someone who can't be there anymore. I walked back to my truck on unsteady legs, understanding finally why my logbooks were filled with entries I couldn't remember writing, why I kept stopping at a place that shouldn't exist. This fuel stop was my purgatory, the place where my mind had broken from grief and created a loop I couldn't escape from. Every 3 weeks, I'd drive the same route, stop for the same fuel, discover the same evidence of previous visits, and forget it all again when I climbed back in my cab. But this time felt different. This time, the weight of memory wasn't crushing me. It was freeing me. I could feel the loop breaking, the artificial fog lifting from my mind. As I started my truck and pulled back onto Highway 50, I could see Austin's lights in the distance, real and solid, and exactly where they should be. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened during those 2 years of repeated visits to a fuel stop that existed only in my grief-stricken mind. But I know I'm finally driving toward home instead of away from it, carrying Sarah's memory with me instead of trying to outrun it on the endless highways of the American West. Some roads lead you in circles, but eventually, if you're lucky, you find your way back to the path that leads home. My name is Imani, and in 12 years of solo trucking across every interstate in America, I'd always prided myself on being completely self-reliant, never needing the company of other drivers or the protection of a convoy. What happened on Interstate 35 through Oklahoma last September taught me that sometimes the dead don't stay buried, and some invitations should never be accepted. I was running a load of textiles from Dallas to Kansas City, taking my usual route north through Oklahoma on a crystal-clear September evening when the sun was setting behind me like liquid gold. The CB had been quiet most of the day, which was fine by me. I preferred the solitude of the road to the constant chatter of drivers complaining about traffic or bragging about their rigs. Around 7:30 p.m., just north of the Red River, my radio crackled to life with a warm, friendly voice using the handle Imani. Breaker 19. This is Imani in a cherry red Kenworth, looking to form up a northbound convoy on I-35. Got room for 3 or 4 more trucks if anyone's interested in some company and better fuel mileage. The voice was smooth, professional, the kind you'd expect from a veteran driver who knew the roads like scripture. I normally would have kept my mouth shut. But something about the loneliness of that endless Oklahoma highway made me key my mic. This is Imani in a blue Peterbilt, about 10 miles behind you. I could use some company for the next couple hundred miles. The response came immediately, filled with genuine warmth. Welcome aboard, Imani. We've got Edith in a white Freightliner about 5 miles ahead of you, and Nalani in a green Mack bringing up the rear. Pull up between Edith and me when you catch up, and we'll make some miles together. Within 20 minutes, I could see the convoy ahead. 4 big rigs running in perfect formation, maintaining exactly the right spacing for maximum fuel efficiency. As I accelerated to catch up, I noticed something odd about the trucks. They all looked pristine, like they'd just rolled off the showroom floor. But the designs were old. Classic shapes from the 1970s that you'd normally only see at truck shows or museums. I pulled into position between Imani's red Kenworth and Edith's white Freightliner, and immediately felt the fuel savings as we settled into a smooth rhythm. The CB chatter was friendly and professional. Discussions about weather conditions, traffic reports, recommendations for good truck stops ahead. But as the miles rolled by, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. Edith mentioned stopping for fuel at a truck stop in Oklahoma City that I knew had been torn down 5 years ago to make room for a shopping center. When I tried to correct her, she laughed and said, "Honey, I was just there last week. Best coffee and pie in the state." Nalani chimed in with directions to a way station that had been relocated in the 1990s, talking about it like it was still in its original location. The conversations gradually took on a nostalgic tone, with the other drivers reminiscing about routes and regulations from decades past. They talked about CB etiquette and trucking customs that had fallen out of use before I'd even gotten my CDL. When I mentioned modern GPS systems and electronic logs, there was silence on the radio for several minutes, like they didn't understand what I was talking about. As we approached Oklahoma City around 10 p.m., Imani announced that he'd be taking the bypass around the city, following a route that would avoid construction on the main interstate. I knew that construction had been completed 3 years ago, but I followed the convoy as it exited I-35 onto older highways that wound through countryside I'd never seen before. The roads were narrow and poorly marked, but my fellow drivers seemed to know exactly where they were going. "These back roads are slower," Edith's voice came through the CB, "but they're safer than the interstate at night. Fewer accidents, fewer problems with the law." Something about the way she said it sent a chill through me. I tried to use my GPS to figure out our location, but the screen showed nothing but blank space, like we were driving through an area that didn't exist on any map. The landscape outside my windows looked wrong somehow. Too empty, too uniform. like a movie set designed to look like rural Oklahoma, but missing all the small details that make a place real. The farmhouses we passed were dark and appeared abandoned, with no lights in the windows and no signs of life. Even stranger, we didn't encounter any other traffic. No cars, no other trucks. Nothing but our 5-truck convoy rolling through the darkness. Around midnight, Nalani's voice came over the radio with what sounded like a farewell. "Well, folks, this is my exit. Thanks for the company, and maybe we'll run together again sometime." I watched her green Mac take an off-ramp that led to nothing but empty fields, disappearing into the darkness like she'd driven off the edge of the world. 30 minutes later, Edith announced her departure. "Time for me to head home, y'all. Safe travels, and remember, the old ways are sometimes the best ways." Her white Freightliner took an exit I didn't see until she was already gone, vanishing into the night without leaving so much as tire marks on the asphalt. Now it was just Imani and me, running through the Oklahoma darkness on roads that shouldn't exist. The CB had fallen silent except for the occasional crackle of static, and I was starting to feel a deep, bone-chilling fear that I couldn't explain. When I tried to call dispatch on my cell phone, there was no signal, not even a single bar. "Imani," I finally keyed my mic. "Where exactly are we? I've lost GPS signal and I don't recognize these roads." His response came after a long pause, and his voice sounded different now. Distant, hollow, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "We're on the old roads, Imani. The roads that used to connect places that don't exist anymore. The roads that drivers like us used before the new highways came and changed everything." That's when I remembered something I'd heard at a truck stop years earlier. An old-timer talking about a convoy of drivers who'd been killed in a massive pileup on I-35 back in 1978. 5 trucks running together on a foggy night, hit by a drunk driver who crossed the median. All 5 drivers died instantly, but truckers claimed you could still see their convoy on certain nights, running the old routes they'd driven when they were alive. "Imani," I whispered into the mic, "what year do you think it is?" His laugh was soft and sad. "Time doesn't work the same way out here, Imani. We've been driving these roads for, well, it feels like decades. Waiting for someone like you, someone who still remembers what it means to be a real trucker, to join us permanently." I realized with growing horror that this wasn't just a friendly convoy. It was a recruitment drive. They were trying to convince me to join their eternal journey through the netherworld of forgotten highways. I could feel the pull, the temptation to just keep driving with them forever. Never having to worry about schedules or regulations or the loneliness of solo driving. But I also realized that if I stayed with them much longer, I might never find my way back to the world of the living. Summoning every ounce of willpower I had, I yanked my steering wheel hard to the right, breaking formation and heading for what looked like a dirt road leading back toward the interstate. Imani's voice followed me over the CB, fading with distance. "Safe travels, Imani. If you ever get lonely out there, just call for us on Channel 19. We'll be waiting on the old roads, running the routes that time forgot." I drove for 3 hours on back roads and farm lanes before finally finding I-35 again, emerging from the darkness like a swimmer breaking the surface of a deep, cold lake. When I reached Kansas City and delivered my load, I did some research at the local library. Sure enough, there had been a 5-truck convoy killed on I-35 in October 1978. Drivers named Imani, Edith, and Nalani among them. I still drive solo, but now, when the CB gets too quiet and the road stretches too empty ahead of me, I remember that some company isn't worth the price they ask. There are worse things than loneliness on the highways, and some invitations lead to destinations you can never leave. My name is May, and in 18 years of trucking, I'd maintained a spotless safety record and never failed a single DOT inspection. Until I encountered that nightmare inspection station on Interstate 77 in South Carolina. What happened there in the oppressive July heat still makes me question whether I'm driving through reality or trapped in some bureaucratic hell designed to break drivers' minds. I was hauling a load of automotive parts from Charlotte to Savannah, running right on schedule on a sweltering Thursday afternoon when the humidity made the air feel thick enough to swim through. I-77 through South Carolina is normally a straightforward run. Good roads, predictable traffic, routine DOT presence. I'd driven this exact route probably 200 times over the years. Knew every mile marker, every rest area, every enforcement zone like they were tattooed on my brain. Around 3:30 p.m., just south of Columbia, I saw the portable DOT inspection signs ahead and dutifully moved into the inspection lane. Random inspections were part of the business, and I never worried because my truck was always maintained to perfection, my logs were immaculate, and my cargo was properly secured. The inspection station was set up in a large paved area off the highway, with several bays for different types of inspections and a small trailer serving as the office. The DOT officer who flagged me over was a tall, severe-looking woman named Vienna according to her badge. She had an odd, formal way of speaking, like English wasn't her first language, and she moved with mechanical precision that made me slightly uncomfortable. "Driver, please exit your vehicle and present your logbook, registration, and medical certificate for inspection," she said, her voice carrying an unusual accent I couldn't place. I handed over my documents, confident everything was in order. Vienna examined them with unusual intensity, holding each paper up to the light and studying them through what looked like a magnifying glass. After several minutes, she frowned and said, "Your medical certificate shows an expiration date that has not yet occurred, according to our calendar system." I looked at the certificate, confused. It was valid for another 8 months, issued by the same doctor I'd used for years. "Ma'am, that certificate is current. It doesn't expire until March of next year," I explained. But Vienna shook her head and made a note on her clipboard. "According to our records, March occurred 14 months ago. This document is invalid." She handed me a violation citation written in what appeared to be a mixture of English and symbols I'd never seen before. The inspection of my truck became increasingly surreal. Vienna found violations that made no sense. She cited me for having excessive chromatic reflection from my mirrors, unauthorized temporal displacement in my odometer reading, and irregular frequency patterns in my CB radio. Each violation was written on official-looking forms, but the language was a bizarre mixture of legitimate DOT terminology and complete nonsense. I tried to argue, pointing out that my truck had passed a full DOT inspection just 2 months earlier, but Vienna produced a copy of that inspection report that showed completely different results. According to her version, I'd failed multiple safety checks and had been ordered to take my truck out of service immediately. The signature on the report looked like mine, but I had no memory of failing any inspection. "Ma'am, there's been some kind of mistake," I said, feeling increasingly desperate. "I've never failed an inspection in 18 years of driving. My safety record is spotless." Vienna consulted a thick manual filled with regulations I'd never heard of, written in that same strange mixture of languages. According to Section 47.3b of the Temporal Commerce Regulations, drivers who claim perfect safety records are automatically flagged for enhanced inspection procedures. The enhanced inspection involved Vienna examining parts of my truck that didn't exist. She spent 20 minutes inspecting my reality displacement generator, citing me for improper maintenance of equipment I'd never heard of. She found violations in my dimensional stabilizers and wrote me up for failing to properly calibrate my temporal navigation system. Each citation came with incomprehensible fines and requirements for repairs that no mechanic could possibly perform. Other drivers were going through similar experiences at the station. I watched Hadassah, a veteran driver I'd known for years, being cited for unauthorized consciousness fluctuations, while her truck was inspected for interdimensional cargo leakage. She looked as confused and frightened as I felt, showing Vienna the same documents she'd used successfully for years, only to be told they were invalid according to regulations that seemed to change by the minute. The worst part was that Vienna kept producing evidence of previous violations I'd supposedly committed. She showed me a thick file with my name on it, filled with inspection reports dating back years, all showing serious safety violations and fines I'd never received. Some of the reports were dated from future dates, describing inspections that supposedly hadn't happened yet, but somehow already showed I would fail them. According to our records, Vienna said, consulting a computer screen that displayed information in shifting, unreadable symbols. You have been operating your vehicle in violation of federal safety regulations for the past 7 years. Your commercial driving license should have been suspended in 2019, but due to a clerical error, you have continued operating illegally. I demanded to see a supervisor, to call my company, to contact anyone who could verify that this was all insane, but Vienna informed me that the inspection station operated under enhanced temporal jurisdiction, and that normal communication protocols were suspended during the inspection process. My cell phone had no signal. My CB radio produced only static, and the landline in the inspection office was apparently disconnected from the standard timeline. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, or maybe days. Time seemed to move strangely at the inspection station, with the sun appearing to move backward and forward in the sky randomly. I watched other drivers complete their inspections and drive away. But when I tried to follow them with my eyes, they seemed to vanish before reaching the highway, like they were driving into empty air. Vienna eventually produced a final document, a notice that my truck was being impounded for chronic temporal violations, and that I was being detained indefinitely pending a hearing before an interdimensional commerce tribunal. The document was written in multiple languages, some of which appeared to be shifting and changing as I read them. That's when I noticed something that broke the spell: Vienna's shadow. Despite the bright afternoon sun, her shadow fell in the wrong direction, and it moved independently of her body. When she reached for her clipboard, her shadow reached in the opposite direction. When she walked to the left, her shadow moved to the right. I realized that none of this was real. Not Vienna, not the inspection station, not the impossible violations or the surreal regulations. Something was trying to trap me in a bureaucratic nightmare, feeding off my fear and confusion. I'd driven into some kind of supernatural snare designed to look like a routine dot inspection. This isn't real, I said out loud. And Vienna's mechanical movements suddenly stopped. Her face went blank, like someone had turned off a switch, and the entire inspection station began to flicker like a mirage. The other drivers, the inspection bays, even the paperwork in my hands started to become transparent. I ran to my truck, fired up the engine, and drove straight out of the inspection area, ignoring Vienna's suddenly distorted voice calling for me to stop. As soon as my wheels hit the real highway, the illusion collapsed completely. In my mirrors, I could see nothing but empty pavement where the inspection station had been. When I reached Savannah and delivered my load, I called the South Carolina DOT to report the incident. They had no record of any inspection stations operating on I-77 that day, and no inspector named Vienna in their entire department. According to their logs, There had been no scheduled inspections anywhere along my route. I still drive I-77 regularly, but I've never seen that inspection station again. Sometimes other drivers on the CB mention strange DOT stops where the violations don't make sense, and the officers ask impossible questions. But those stories usually end with the driver waking up in their cab hours later, parked safely at a real truck stop with no memory of how they got there. I think there are things out there on the highways that feed on our fears. Our fear of regulations, of losing our licenses, of being trapped in bureaucratic nightmares we can't escape. They create elaborate illusions designed to keep us confused and compliant. But they can't survive once you realize they're not real. Some inspections aren't about safety at all. They're about something much darker, and the only way to pass them is to refuse to take the test. My name is Emilio, and I've been running the same delivery route from Los Angeles to Detroit for 9 years, always arriving at the Midwest Distribution Center at exactly 5:30 a.m. on Thursdays. What I discovered last October when I started arriving at different decades instead of different times has convinced me that some deliveries create holes in reality itself. I'd made the run to the warehouse district in Detroit probably 200 times over the years, hauling electronics and computer equipment for various retailers across the Midwest. The route never changed. Interstate 10 to Interstate 40 to Interstate 44 to Interstate 55. Then north on Interstate 75 straight into Detroit. The destination was always the same too. Midwest Distribution Center on Industrial Boulevard, a massive concrete warehouse that had been receiving my Thursday morning deliveries since 2015. That Thursday in October started like any other. I'd left Los Angeles on Monday evening, made my usual stops for fuel and mandatory rest breaks, and rolled into Detroit right on schedule. The morning fog was thick as I navigated the familiar streets of the warehouse district. But I could have driven to the distribution center blindfolded. When I pulled up to the receiving dock at 5:30 a.m. sharp, everything looked exactly as it should. The same concrete building, the same loading bays, the same faded signs pointing to different areas of the facility. But when I walked up to the receiving office to check in, the first thing I noticed was the computer system. Instead of the modern touchscreen terminals I'd been signing into for years, there was an ancient green screen computer that looked like something from the early 1990s. The receiving clerk, a middle-aged man named Ivan according to his name tag, was dressed in a style that seemed decades out of date. Polyester shirt, wide tie, thick-rimmed glasses that had been fashionable when I was a kid. "Morning delivery from Los Angeles," I told Ivan, handing him my paperwork. He examined the documents with confusion, turning them over and holding them up to the light like he'd never seen anything like them before. "These shipping forms are unusual," he said slowly. "The format is different from what we normally receive. And this date, it says 2024, but that's impossible." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "It's October 17th, 2024. Thursday morning, just like always." But Ivan shook his head seriously. "Son, I don't know what kind of prank you're trying to pull, but it's October 17th, 1987. We don't use computers like the ones described on this manifest, and half these part numbers don't exist in any catalog I've ever seen." That's when I really looked around the receiving office and noticed details I'd missed in my rush to get unloaded. The calendar on the wall showed 1987, with a picture of a muscle car that looked genuinely vintage rather than retro. The coffee maker was an old percolator instead of the modern machine I was used to seeing. Even the fluorescent lights had that yellowish tinge of older technology. Ivan called over another worker named Hayden, and together they examined my cargo manifest like it was written in a foreign language. These electronics, Hayden said, tablets, smartphones, wireless networking equipment. None of this exists. Are you sure you're at the right warehouse? I walked outside to double-check the address. And sure enough, I was at 1247 Industrial Boulevard, exactly where I'd been delivering for 9 years. But the neighborhood looked different. The other warehouses appeared older, more run down, and the cars in the parking lot were all models from the 1980s. Boxy sedans and station wagons that I hadn't seen on the road in decades. Even the street signs looked different, with older fonts and faded paint that suggested they'd been installed years earlier than I remembered. I tried calling my dispatcher on my cell phone, but there was no signal. Not just no bars, but the phone couldn't detect any cellular network at all. When I asked Ivan if I could use their landline, he directed me to a rotary phone mounted on the wall. The dial tone sounded different, older somehow. And when I tried to call my company's main number, a recorded message said the number I'd dialed was not in service. Over the next 2 hours, I unloaded my cargo with growing confusion and fear. The warehouse workers treated every item like alien technology. Laptops that wouldn't power on because the electrical outlets were different. Smartphones that they examined like artifacts from the future. Networking equipment that they had no idea how to handle. They kept asking questions about manufacturers and product categories that apparently didn't exist in 1987. When the unloading was complete, Ivan handed me a delivery receipt to sign. But the format was completely different from what I was used to. Carbon paper copies instead of digital signatures, company logos I didn't recognize, and a date stamp that clearly showed October 17th, 1987. As I signed the receipt, I noticed my handwriting looked different, shakier, like my hand wasn't entirely under my control. The strangest part was that despite the apparent time displacement, my delivery was expected. Yvonne had paperwork showing that a truck from my company was scheduled for a Thursday morning delivery, even though the company apparently didn't exist in 1987 according to any records they could find. It was like someone had been planning for my arrival across decades. I climbed back into my truck and started the drive home. But the world outside my windshield continued to reflect the wrong decade. Gas stations displayed prices of 60 cents per gallon. Billboard advertisements were for products and movies I remembered from my childhood. And other trucks on the road were all older models that should have been in museums. The return trip to Los Angeles took place in what appeared to be 1987. But when I arrived at my home terminal, everything was back to normal 2024. My dispatcher had no record of any problems with the delivery. My truck's GPS showed I'd taken the normal route in the normal amount of time, and my electronic logs indicated a completely routine run. But I had the delivery receipt from 1987 in my pocket. Carbon paper and all, with signatures from Ivan and Hayden and a date stamp that couldn't be explained. When I tried to research Midwest Distribution Center online, I found records showing the company had operated at that address from 1985 to 1989, then had been sold and demolished to make room for the modern facility where I'd been making deliveries for years. The next Thursday, I made the same run to Detroit, arriving at 5:30 a.m. as always. This time the warehouse looked different again. Newer than 1987, but not as modern as I remembered. The receiving clerk was a young woman named Renata, who dressed and talked like someone from the early 2000s. The computer system was more advanced than the 1987 version, but still seemed outdated. And she accepted my delivery with the same confusion about dates and technology. According to the calendar in her office, it was October 17th, 2003. My cargo of 2024 electronics was even more incomprehensible to her than it had been to the 1987 crew. But again, my delivery was expected despite the apparent impossibility of my company existing in that time period. Over the following months, Each Thursday delivery took me to a different decade. Sometimes I arrived in the 1990s, sometimes the early 2000s, once even in what appeared to be 1979 based on the cars, clothes, and technology I encountered. But always at the same address, always with workers who were expecting a delivery from a company that shouldn't exist in their time period. I started keeping detailed records of each delivery. Photographs when possible, copies of receipts, notes about the differences in each decade. The pattern became clear. I was somehow delivering modern electronics to the past, creating a temporal supply chain that defied every law of physics I could imagine. The warehouse workers in each time period treated my arrivals as routine, but they always seemed slightly confused by the advanced technology and future dates on my paperwork. It was like they were compelled to accept the deliveries without fully understanding what was happening. I finally quit making the Detroit run when I realized what was happening. Each delivery was creating a temporal paradox, introducing future technology into past decades. Some of the electronics I delivered in the 1980s and 1990s were later invented by companies that had reverse-engineered the devices I'd brought them. I was caught in a causality loop, delivering technology to the past that would eventually lead to the creation of that same technology in my present. The last time I drove to Detroit, I deliberately arrived late, breaking my perfect 5:30 a.m. schedule. When I finally reached the warehouse at 8 a.m., it was the correct modern facility in the proper decade. The receiving clerk had no record of any scheduled delivery, and I drove away with my cargo still loaded, finally breaking the temporal cycle that had trapped me for months. I still don't understand how or why it happened. But I know that some routes exist outside normal time, and some deliveries connect decades that should never touch. The highways may look the same, but they can take you to destinations that exist in the wrong century, where your cargo becomes history and your signature changes the future in ways you'll never understand. My name is Stetson, and after 21 years of navigating Montana's treacherous mountain highways, I thought I knew every mile of Interstate 90 through the Rockies, like the lines on my weathered hands. What happened during that blizzard last December on the stretch between Bozeman and Billings proved that some roads can trap you in moments that never end, forcing you to drive the same mile for eternity. I was hauling a load of construction equipment from Seattle to Minneapolis, taking my usual route through Montana's high country, despite weather warnings about an incoming storm system. December in Montana is always a gamble. You can have clear skies at noon and whiteout conditions by evening. But I'd driven through worse, and I had a delivery deadline to meet. The load was valuable enough that the company was paying premium rates for winter delivery, and I needed the money for Christmas presents for my grandkids back in Texas. The storm hit around 11:30 p.m., just as I was climbing the grade east of Bozeman. Within minutes, visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet, and the wind was gusting so hard it was pushing my fully loaded rig sideways on the highway. I'd been through plenty of Montana blizzards, but this one felt different, more intense, more malevolent, like the mountain itself was trying to shake me loose from the road. My GPS showed I was approaching mile marker 298, about 40 miles from Billings, where I planned to wait out the storm at a truck stop. The road conditions were deteriorating rapidly, but I figured I could make it those last 40 miles if I took it slow and steady. That's when I noticed something strange about my odometer. It was stuck at 347,298 miles, the same reading it had shown for the past 10 minutes, despite the fact that I was clearly moving forward. I didn't think much of it at first, figuring the cold was affecting the electronic systems. But when I passed mile marker 298, for what I was certain was the third time in 20 minutes, I started to get worried. The marker looked identical each time. Same dents, same weathering, Same snowdrift formation around the base. I tried to convince myself I was just disoriented by the storm, but deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong. My CB radio had been quiet most of the night, but suddenly it crackled to life with a voice I didn't recognize. "Stetson, this is Jude. You need to stop your truck right now. You're caught in the loop, brother. Don't keep driving or you'll never get out." I keyed my mic to respond, but the voice continued. "I've been watching you pass mile marker 298 for the last 3 hours. Time isn't working right on this stretch of highway tonight." I pulled over to the shoulder, my hands shaking as I grabbed the CB mic. "Jude, where are you? I can't see any other trucks out here." His response chilled me to the bone. "I'm about 50 yards behind you, but I'm also about 50 yards ahead of you. We're all stuck in the same mile, Stetson. Legend's here too. Been driving this same stretch since the storm started 6 hours ago." That's when I heard another voice, gruff and tired. "This is Legend, and Jude's right. I've been passing the same landmarks over and over. That bent guardrail, that distinctive rock formation, that dead tree with the broken top. My fuel gauge hasn't moved in hours. My clock is stuck at 11:47, and my odometer stopped at 298.3 miles. I looked at my own dashboard and felt my stomach drop. My clock showed 11:47 p.m., exactly what Legend had said, and my fuel gauge was frozen at 3/4 full despite having been driving for hours. My odometer still read 347,298 miles. And when I tried to advance my electronic logbook, it wouldn't accept any entries after 11:47 p.m. "How is this possible?" I asked over the CB. But I already knew the answer wasn't going to be rational. Legend's voice came back. "Near as I can figure, this storm isn't natural. Something about this stretch of highway, this particular mile, traps trucks during certain weather conditions. Time gets stuck, and so do we. I tried calling my dispatcher on my cell phone, but there was no signal, not even emergency service. My satellite radio was locked on the same song, playing the same 3 minutes over and over again. Even my truck's engine sounded different, like it was running in a mechanical loop. The same combustion cycle repeating endlessly. Over the next several hours, or what felt like hours, since time had apparently stopped, I talked with Jude and Legend over the CB. They'd both been trapped in this same mile for different lengths of subjective time. Jude claimed he'd been here for 8 hours. Legend said it had been closer to 12. But when we compared notes, we realized we were all experiencing the same events in the same order. "Every time we pass that bent guardrail," Jude explained, "my headlights catch the same snowflake pattern on the metal. Every time. The exact same flakes in the exact same positions. Like they're frozen in place." Legend confirmed the same phenomenon. "That rock formation. I've been watching one specific icicle hanging from the overhang. It never moves, never changes, just stays suspended in the exact same position." I started paying attention to the details of my environment, and sure enough, everything was identical on each pass. The snowdrift formations never changed shape despite the howling wind. The snow falling in my headlights followed the same patterns, the same flakes appearing in the same positions. Even the static on my CB radio crackled in the same rhythm every time. "The scary part," Legend continued, "is that I'm starting to forget things from before the loop. My wife's face is getting fuzzy in my memory. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. It's like this mile is erasing everything except the experience of driving it." As the night wore on, or didn't wear on, depending on how you looked at it, we discovered other disturbing aspects of our situation. Our trucks never got dirty despite driving through a blizzard. Our windshield wipers moved in perfect synchronization. Most unsettling of all, when we tried to vary our speed or change lanes, we found ourselves back in the exact same position within minutes. Like invisible hands were guiding our vehicles back into formation. Jude made the first breakthrough when he deliberately tried to crash his truck into the guardrail. I figured if I could break something, change something, maybe it would snap us out of the loop. But instead of impacting the metal barrier, his truck simply passed through it like it was made of fog, emerging unharmed on the other side and finding himself back in the driving lane. We're not really driving anymore, he realized. We're just experiencing the memory of driving. This whole mile exists in some kind of temporal bubble, and we're trapped inside it, like insects in amber. Legend had a different theory. I think this stretch of highway has seen so many accidents, so many deaths during winter storms, that it's become cursed. The mountain remembers all the trucks that never made it through, and now it's collecting more. I tried every trick I could think of to break free. I shifted into different gears, turned on and off various systems, even tried driving backward. Nothing worked. Every action led to the same result. Finding myself back in the same position, passing mile marker 298 for the 1,000th time. It was Jude who finally found the answer, though the solution was as disturbing as the problem. The only way out, he said over the CB, is to accept that we died in this storm. We have to stop fighting it, stop trying to survive, and let ourselves crash. The idea terrified me, but as the endless repetition continued and my memories of life outside this mile began to fade, I realized he was right. We weren't trapped drivers. We were the ghosts of drivers who had already died, replaying our final moments over and over again. With trembling hands, I let go of the steering wheel and closed my eyes. I felt my truck leave the road, felt the impact, felt the crushing cold of the Montana winter claim me at last. And then, mercifully, I felt nothing at all. If you're a trucker reading this, be careful on Interstate 90 through Montana during winter storms. If you find yourself passing the same mile marker repeatedly, if your clock stops working and your fuel gauge freezes, don't fight it. Some roads never let you reach your destination, and some miles are meant to be your last. That's all for tonight's terrifying journey into trucker horror, Verified Fears family. If these stories kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the highways hold more dark secrets than you could ever imagine, and we're just getting started exploring them together.